so I'm absolutely delighted to be giving the laudation for David. David is a brilliant researcher, so I'm very happy to be able to talk a bit about him and his research. Although giving a laudation is quite easy and quite hard. So it's easy because David is one of the world's best labour economists. He's also one of my co-authors, former colleague at MIT and a friend. But it's also hard because I've never given a laudation before, so I'm not quite sure what to talk about. And when I sent my initial slides, it was like trying to get a paper published. They were kind of rejected by the editor, and I had to revise them, and I revised them a few times. I hope they're a little bit better now. It's also hard, which is the flip side of David's amazing research, is that there's so much David has written on. It's very hard to find an area of labour economics where he hasn't made a major contribution to. I mean, to crudely sum up some of his work, I think he's looking fundamentally at what determines the pay and wages of workers in America and around the world. What are the main drivers of that? And I'll talk a bit, as Clements mentioned, on one of the main things, which is the role of technological change, in particular the task-based approach, which he has pioneered and has fundamentally reshaped the way we think about the world. But also, I won't get a chance to talk about the work, for example, that was mentioned that he's done on trade in China, which has changed the way, reevaluated the way I think economists have thought about trade, realized that shocks to the labour market can be much more persistent than people thought because people are much less mobile than was previously thought by economists. Contributions that he's made in terms of thinking about temporary work and outsourcing, work he did on disability. Disability benefits are now more important than unemployment in many countries. Work he's done on the minimum wage and wage inequality, work on education, even work on the decline of the labour share and the rise of superstar firms. That was probably his best work with me, but modesty prevents me from saying anything more about it. So before I talk about some of his research, I was trying to think about what is the David Alter production function? Economists love how you get outputs and inputs. So I was thinking about what are the things about David's production function. I think there's kind of 6 key elements that I wanted to mention. You might call this autorization of the production function. So the first one is David is a genius at the generation, organization, and analysis of large and complex data sets. He's very generous, and he also makes it available for other researchers. And this is a really undervalued part of our profession. I think it was Zvi Grilic who said the rewards of the economics profession often go to theorists of economics or econometrics. They're like the master chefs. But no matter how good the chef is, if the raw materials, if the ingredients that you're using in the recipe are not any good, the meal is not going to be very good. So the importance of data, and David has been an amazing pioneer in putting together different data sets, new data and existing data, is really one of his major contributions. But above and beyond that, he's also introduced many new conceptual frameworks in a way what I thought disciplinary arbitrage. So David, you may not know, actually started, I think, as an undergraduate looking at psychology. And his work spans bringing in concepts between economics, psychology, computer science. You'll hear about his work today on expertise, which borrows concepts from the efficient coding hypothesis, from neuroscience, even philosophy, and for the work on Polanyi that he's done. So new conceptual frameworks married with great data, and also a third element of as a supreme communicator, which you'll experience in a few minutes. So in terms of his presentations, his policy work, and his media work, he really is superb at that. Having spent the last year and a half or so in government and doing politics, you realize how important the ability to communicate clearly and make your work available in a non-technical way is for changing policy in the world. Officials and politicians are not reading academic papers, they're reading summaries of those and things which come out in a much more digestible form. So David's work in communication really is important, both for his own work and that of others. Fourthly, he's a real institution builder, as Clement said as well, and a steward of institutions. So the work for the MBR Labour Studies, for Blueprint Labs, the MIT Future Work, are all examples of actually how economics should be, working in kind of teams rather than as lone scholars, and using that to actually build up our knowledge. And part of that, and this is the fifth part, he's a very generous mentor of students and young scholars. I saw that very directly when I was with him at MIT. Very generous about bringing up the new skills and new blood of the future. And finally, and this is also perhaps underestimated, is it's actually working with him is a real joy. He has the joy of research. He's full of wit and humor. And I tell you need that sometimes when you're doing research work and research work gets hard. Just the fun and enjoyment of doing it, and David is a really fun and enjoyable person to work with. So I think that's what I call the DA production function. I first met David in Germany in the mid-1990s, and there was a conference on the impact of technology on the labor market, and Larry Katz and Alan Kruger, I think, had been invited to give one of their papers, and then who actually came, much to some of the German organizers' surprise, was this young PhD student who was a co-author on the paper I put up here, which came out in 1988 in the QJA. And I think initially they were thinking, who is this guy? And then suddenly David came, made this amazing presentation which changed the way that people thought about the whole role of skill-biased technical change in information technology, which really was a revelation. So what was it all about? So I'm going to put David's work in a bit of historical context. So what economists were struggling with at that time was the fact that we saw wage inequality rising first in the US from the late 1970s, then many other countries like the UK. And part of that increase of inequality was an increase of the rate of return to education. Educated workers were getting a much bigger premium than less educated workers. And that was surprising because over the last many decades, there's been a big increase in the fraction of people who were educated. The labor supply had gone up, and you would think when labor supply goes up, that would lead to a relative fall of the premium of having education. In fact, the opposite was true. So people then speculated, well, what's going on is some other shock, and there were various things which could explain that other shock to the demand side, one of which was technical change, skill-biased technical change, as we often call it. But a lot of that work was actually indirect. And one of the great contributions of David's paper was actually to get more direct measures of technology, of computers, of other proxies of technical change, and show that was actually related to some of the changes which were happening in the labor market over long periods of time. So that model, and in some of his, this sometimes called the canonical model, is sometimes described as this Tinbergen race between technology and education. That technology on the one hand increases the relative demand for more skilled, more educated workers, and the supply side of education is trying to race to keep up with that. If it falls behind, wage inequality goes up. If education supplies sufficiently fast, that can put a lid on inequality. So that kind of way of thinking about the world is one of the main ways that we think about how inequality changes and skill premiums change. But it actually leaves a lot out. One of the things that left out was the next big paper, I think, that David came along with in 2003 with Frank Levy and Dick Murnane. And this was emphasizing that what we should be thinking about when we think about occupations, that occupations are bundles of different tasks. And those tasks have very different content. And when we think about changes, whether it's technology or some other kinds of big changes to what's happening in the environment, it's how those changes like technology affect those tasks, which will then will lead through to changes in the labor market. And to give you an example of that, the traditional way of thinking about this, and this was the way I was thinking about it before David's work came along, was we think about new technologies like information technology and computers. They are going to directly substitute for less skilled workers. Think about manual workers like Charlie Chappell and Modern Times on the assembly line. The demand for those type of workers goes down. For like more highly educated, we talked about these non-manual workers, managers, doctors, lawyers, and scientists. ICT technology helps us and increases the demand for those. So it's a simple kind of binary difference that technology could affect, increasing the demand for more skilled workers. What David's contribution, well, one of the contributions was to say, well, what's lying behind this idea? When we think about different types of jobs, manual or non-manual, we're often thinking about the kind of the kind of jobs that Charlie Chaplin was doing in modern times on the assembly line was a very routine, repetitive type of task, rules-based, repetitive procedural. And the kind of jobs that non-manual workers were doing were kind of abstract problem-solving, things which required mental flexibility, which were non-routine tasks. So the way that computerization was working was replacing those type of routine tasks. But then when you think about it, things are a lot more complex than that. So you can think about lots of non-manual jobs, like clerical jobs, which were also quite routine jobs. My mother used to work in a bank, and her job was taking in money and giving out money, counting up money and giving the money out. And then when the ATM machine came along, that routine task was basically taken away. And those type of non-manual clerical jobs weren't the least educated jobs. There were some in the middle of the distribution. And by the same token, think about some manual jobs like maids or janitors or security guards or waiters. They're doing a lot of non-routine type of jobs for which the kind of routine replacing type of technology, the computerization and IT, was not having very much effect on them. So rather than this kind of very simplistic view, there's a much richer view of the labor market. Indeed, one of the implications that David and co-authors pursued was that this can lead to a kind of polarization of the labor market, where it's actually the workers in the middle who face a lot of the downward pressure of what's happening with routinization and technology, and the less educated, lower-level workers actually were less affected negatively. So that actually opened up a whole new way of thinking about the labor market and the task-based view. And I think the way that that's been taken in many different dimensions, and David will talk about one of those today with his work on expertise. There's another great paper that he produced last year on new frontiers of how occupations are changing and tasks are changing is another example of this. And I think the paper that he's going to present has many of the features that I described in the David Alter production function. It has some new concepts. There's going to be a concept of expertise, which is about the jargon or codes which are used in occupations, and how not only the quantity of tasks are being changed by technology, but also the content, the quality of tasks are being changed through changing expertise. You'll see the work on the amazing new kind of data which can be used, and things like the Dictionary of Occupational Task and ONET, how that can be used to inform things, and also the arbitrage between different types of disciplines and different types of sciences. And also, you'll see a great way of communicating very complex concepts. So I think this will be a very fun and enjoyable presentation he'll give. So with that, I will end it. And I'll just say that, I think The Economist put this in a very nice way a couple of years ago. David Alter is the kind of voice of the American worker. And I would actually say it's more than that. It's the voice of workers around the world. So here's to David, and looking very much forward to your talk.
Okay, now, as I'm sure you expect, comes the prize handover ceremony, and it's always a complicated choreography. Thank you. Okay, David, now I'm going to read this to you. So, the Center for Economic Studies at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität München proudly honors, after selection by the CES Council, Professor David Alter, Daniel and Gary Rubenfeld, Professor MIT Cambridge, as the Distinguished CES Fellow 2025. With this award, CES honors David Alter's significant contributions to labor economics and invites him to give the Munich Lecture in Economics 2025. Congratulations, and thank you very much. Okay. Oh, thank you. We will keep this. Now, the photo. We will keep this. Now, maybe we can get a little closer.